close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. On we'll finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss the beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. On we'll go.
Okay, here we are. Hello. All right, we should be finishing up this book tonight. I always say we. Well, you're listening, so we. I'm reading, but yeah. So 2 more chapters and the epilogue for Deceived. Let me just make sure everything's doing all right here. Okay, and we'll get into the book. Okay, and my sound is actually working tonight. Holy buckets. Things are working out. All right. Kick back here, and I've got my beverage. Okay, so this is the beginning of day 3. So this book only takes 3 days. The bulk of the book was day 1. Day 2 is 2 chapters. Day 3 is 2 chapters in the epilogue. So let's jump into it. So we're on chapter 12. The sky lightened to the east. Zirid checked his chrono. Almost dawn. The night had disappeared on him. He was too wired to feel fatigue. He worked up the nerve to ask his question of Erin. "What are you going to do?" he asked. She did not look at him, and he took that as a bad sign. "I'm going to get you into the spaceport, and you're going to fly back to your daughter." Assuming he could dodge Imperial cruisers on the way out, which would be no mean feat. "That isn't what I mean, Erin, and you know it. What are you going to do with her?" Erin did not answer, but the set of her jaw told Zirid all he needed to know. He regretted mentioning the Twi'lek to Erin. His honesty could cost Erin her soul. Hunting the Sith who had murdered her master was one thing. Killing the Twi'lek simply to hurt Malgus was something else. As he drove, he found himself hoping that the Twi'lek had left the spaceport. Ahead, the port came into view. He scanned the sky, saw nothing. The control tower was still dark. The Empire had done a poor job of securing the port. They had far too few men guarding a location with many potential entry points. But Zirid supposed they had limited troops and an entire planet to police. He was glad of it. Otherwise, his plan would have had no chance to succeed. I'll circle wide and we'll go up top. The key to this is speed. Won't they spot us on scanners? The tower's dark and I don't see any hardware around. If they have orbiting surveillance on the port, well... He shrugged. If the Empire had orbiting surveillance on or high-altitude surveillance droids watching the spaceport, he and Aaron would have problems. Speed is still the key, he said. Even if they see us, if we can get in and out fast enough, we can still pull it off. Aaron brushed her hair from her face. Where did you see her, the Twi'lek? There, he said, pointing at the large transparent steel windows that opened onto the small craft landing pad where he had spotted the shuttles, the drop ship, and the Twi'lek. Without bringing his macro binoculars to bear, all he could see through the windows were indiscriminate gray shapes, presumably the shuttles. Aaron stared at the windows for a moment, then nodded to herself. Let's go, she said. He killed the running lights on the speeder and took it up to 500 meters, just above the top of the main center structure in the spaceport. Pushing the thrusters as hard as he could, he accelerated toward it. His heart raced, not out of fear that they would be caught, but out of concern that Aaron would find the Twi'lek. He swerved around one of the large craft landing arms that reached up and over them. He hunched behind the controls, anticipating fire at any moment, but none came. Below them, perhaps 100 meters, he could see the roof doors of the various small craft landing pads. Aaron unstrapped herself, turned, and unlatched T7. The droid beeped. Zirid slowed the speeder, but did not stop. If anyone had seen them approach, he wanted them to think that the speeder just kept on going. Ready, he asked, and set the speeder's unsophisticated autopilot to fly on another 10 clicks before setting down. Ready. He released the stick, and he and Aaron quickly maneuvered onto the back of the speeder near T7. The wind pulled at them. He had trouble balancing, but Aaron took him by the arm and steadied him. They sandwiched the droid between them, shared a look. Go, he said. She nodded, and they stepped off the back of the speeder. T7 whooped as they fell. The droid's bulk did not allow them to control their descent. They were flipping end over end immediately. Zirid's field of vision veered rapidly, wildly, between the starry sky and the top of the spaceport below. His stomach crawled up his throat, and he gritted his teeth to keep down the protein bar he'd eaten. End over end they spun, T7 whistling with alarm, until Aaron seized them in her power, ending the spinning and slowed their descent. The metal endurocrete of the spaceport's roof rushed up to meet them. They had only a second, two. Aaron grunted, slowed them still further, until they touched down gently on the roof. Much better than last time, Zirid said, grinning, heart racing. I could go my whole life without another fall and feel I'd missed nothing. Aaron did not so much as smile. Zirid gathered himself, took a blaster in each hand, and scanned the rooftop. He spotted a conduit access panel. There. They ran over to it, and he shot off the metal cover with his blaster, exposing a viper's nest of wires. Ordinarily, a breached cover would set off an alarm in the control tower, but the control tower was dark, unoccupied. Do it, T7. A panel in the droid's abdomen opened, and several thin mechanical arms reached out. All ended in one kind of tool or another. T7 stuck the arms into the wires and began to work. Zirid, still concerned that they may have been spotted, scanned the sky. He saw nothing. T7 hummed while he worked. Come on, Zirid said to the droid. To Aaron, he said, Are you all right? She seemed oddly calm, or preoccupied. I'm fine, she said. The droid gave an excited series of whistles and whoops. He's into the safety and fire suppression system, Aaron said. Trigger it with a 10-second delay, Zirid said to the droid. The droid beeped acquiescence. Malgus bounded into the shuttle. Okay, switching gears. Malgus bounded into the shuttle as it set down near the temple. "The Liston spaceport," he said to the pilot. "Quickly." "Yes, my lord." He tried again to raise Alina on the comm, but got no response. With each moment that passed, his concern grew. He recognized that his emotions were driving him, controlling him, knew too the weakness it evidenced, but he could not let her come to harm, not by a Jedi. Angrel's admonition bounced around his brain. Passions can lead to mistakes. The pilot's voice over the comm disrupted his train of thought. "We have heard the news from have you heard the news from Alderaan, my lord?" "What news?" Malgus said. His muscles bunched as if in anticipation of a blow or combat. The blow came and hit him hard. "There are rumors that an accord has been reached and that a peace treaty will be signed later today. In exchange for the turnover of certain outlying systems to Imperial control, Coruscant will be returned to the Republic." The pilot's words pushed Angrel's words out of Malgus's brain and ricocheted around in his head like blaster shots. Outlying systems. Coruscant returned to the public. Peace. The words applied heat to Malgus's already bubbling emotions. He thought of Angrel and Adras sitting somewhere together, drinking wine and thinking that they had accomplished something by forcing the Republic to surrender some insignificant systems, when in fact they had poisoned the body of the Empire with the venom of peace. Peace? He paced the compartment. Oh, we are in an ad, so I am going to sit here and waste a minute while the ad is going on and blather on about whatever. Have a couple of sips. And because nobody can hear me when we're on break, so, or when where there's an ad going. So 17 more seconds. We'll wait. This is meant for people to listen to, so going live, nobody can hear me during this. So, okay. Now that ad is over, we'll get back to it. So, peace. He paced the compartment, fists clenched, a wild animal tiring of its cage. His thoughts veered between Alina on the one hand, Angrel and Adras on the other. Peace? He slammed his fist into the bulkhead, welcomed the pain. They thought they could tame him, Angrel and Adras. Thought they could use Alina to domesticate him. And wasn't that what she wanted too? She who sought to be his conscience. She who asked him to put love before his duty to the Empire. Malgus's brewing anger boiled over into rage. He slammed his fist down on the work table, denting it. He picked up a chair and threw it against the bulkhead, drove his fist through the small vid-screen built into the wall. "Is everything all right, Darth Malgus?" the pilot called over the comm. "Everything is fine," Malgus said, though nothing was. "Coming up on the spaceport now, my lord," said the pilot. Zirid watched T7 work, anxious. His internal clock was running. They needed to keep moving. Having jacked into the spaceport safety and fire suppression system, T7 was to send a false signal into the network, tricking the sensors into detecting a fuel gas leak in the landing bay where the Imperial shuttles had landed. An alarm indicating the leak of highly explosive fuel gas should trigger evacuation and venting procedures. Or so Zirid hoped. The droid's metal arms worked their magic. T7 cut a wire here, soldered there, reattached several cables here, then plugged into the interface he had rewired. His low whistles and chirps told Zirid he was communicating with the spaceport's network. After a short time, the droid retracted his metal arms into the cylinder of his body. "Done?" Zirid asked. T7 beeped an affirmative. Zirid slapped him on the head, and the droid protested with a low beep. "Then let's go," Zirid said. He and Aaron sprinted across the roof toward the launch doors, with T7 wheeling after them. Zirad counted down from 10 in his head. Just as they reached the launch doors, just as he finished his countdown, sirens began to wail, audible even from the roof. A mechanical voice spoke over the facility's speakers. A hazardous substance spill has occurred in Landing Bay 16B. There is significant danger. Please move rapidly toward the nearest exit. A hazardous substance spill has occurred in Landing Bay 16B. If T7 did his job, Zirad said, and the droid beeped indignantly. The system will detect the fuel gas leak in the pad right below us. When it does, it should open the launch doors automatically to vent the gas. The roof vibrated as the launch doors unsealed and started slowly to slide open. Nicely done, Zirad said to the droid. Ahead, Malgus saw the small spaceport the Empire had commandeered. It looked somewhat like an upside-down spider with a few too many legs, with large craft landing arms sticking out from the bloated body and raised skyward. Launch doors over the various small craft landing pads dotted the spider's body. All were closed save one. Light spilled out into the sky through the open doors. There is a crowd near the port's entrance, the pilot said. Malgus looked away from the open launch doors to see dozens of people pouring out of one of the entrances to the spaceport and milling about. Most were port workers in dungarees, citizens of Coruscant whom the Empire had pressed into service to do menial labor at the port. But he counted perhaps 20 Imperial soldiers, a dozen Navy sailors, and a handful of other soldiers in half armor. He pressed his face to the window to look more closely at the soldiers. He saw Captain Kersey, one of those he had picked to accompany Alina. But he did not see Alina. "Set down near the doors," he said, "quickly." The shuttle touched down with a heavy thud, and Malgus hurried out. Upon seeing him, the Imperial soldiers snapped to attention and offered a salute. The workers backed away, fear in their eyes. Perhaps they heard of what he'd done at the hospital. Malgus walked up to Captain Kersey, a powerfully built man whose bald head sat like a boulder upon his thick neck. Malgus towered over him. "Darth Malgus, there is a fuel gas leak in the small craft landing area. We evacuated while the safety system—" "Where is Alina?" Malgus asked. "She is—" Kurse looked around the crowd. His skin turned blotchy. To one of his men he said, "Where is the Twi'lek?" "I saw her near the other shuttle, sir," replied another of the soldiers. "I assumed she followed." Malgus grabbed Kersey by his plasteel breastplate and pulled him nose to nose. "She was with you before the gas leak?" Kersey's head bobbed on his neck. "Yes, she—" "Take me." "The fuel gas, my lord." "There is no fuel gas. It is a ruse to get to Alina." "To get to him," he says to himself. "What?" Kersey said. Malgus threw Kersey to the ground and strode past him for the port doors. Behind him, he heard Kersey call out for the other soldiers to follow. By the time the doors slid open before Malgus, he had 6 elite soldiers with blaster rifles in orbit around him. "This way, my lord," said Kersey, taking position beside him. "Speed and precision," Zirad said, as much a reminder to himself as to Aaron. "Speed and precision." They watched the launch doors pull back to vent non-existent fuel gas. The open doors revealed the landing pad below. Zirad saw the 2 Imperial shuttles, the Dragonfly-class dropship. The sirens continued to scream. The automated voice on the speakers continued to drone on. Zirad would hijack the dropship. He'd have to dodge Imperial fighters and cruisers on the way out of Coruscant space. The shuttles would fly like the square heaps they were, and he'd get shot down as soon as he cleared the atmosphere. The dropship, at least, would give him a decent chance of getting clear. He took Aaron by the bicep. "You can still come with me, Aaron." She looked him in the face, and he saw once more, for the first time since seeing her again, the deep understanding that lived in her eyes. "I can't," she said. "You can," he insisted. "You've honored your master's memory." Time to go, she said. Speed and precision, you said. He bit back his reply, and once more they wrapped T7 in their shared grasp and leapt into the void. Again, Aaron's power slowed their descent and cushioned their landing. They hit the pad's metal endurocrete floor, assaulted on all sides by the wail of the sirens and the relentless voice on the loudspeakers. Zirid took quick stock of the situation. He saw no one in the landing area, and the only way out, a pair of double doors leading into a long corridor beyond, were open. Everyone must have evacuated. Both of the Imperial shuttles had their landing ramps down. The dropship did not, and the canopy of its cockpit was dimmed, as opaque as dirty water. T7, I need to crack open that dragonfly, right now. The droid beeped agreement and wheeled toward the dropship's rear door. Zirid looked to Aaron and gave it another try. Reconsider, Aaron. He stood directly before her, forcing her to see him, to hear him. Come with me, please. He smiled, trying to make light. We'll start a farm on Dantooine, just like I said. She smiled, seemingly amused by the thought, and he was pleased to see it. I can't, Zirid. You'll make a good farmer, though. I'm going to find the Twi'lek, and... She stopped in mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on something over Zirid's shoulder. He whirled around to see the Twi'lek descending the near shuttle's landing ramp, a rucksack thrown over her shoulder. 2 Imperial soldiers in plasteel breastplates flanked her to either side. Each had a blaster rifle slung over his shoulder. All 3 wore breathing masks. They had not left their ship when the alarm sounded, had instead just donned masks. Perhaps there was something on the shuttle they were unwilling to leave unguarded. Everyone froze, and for a moment no one moved. Then all at once everyone moved. The Twi'lek dropped her rucksack, her eyes wide behind the lens of her mask, and went for her blasters. The soldiers cursed in muffled tones, unslung their rifles, and tried to bring them to bear. Aaron ignited her lightsaber. Zirid, one of his blasters still in hand, fired at the soldier on the right. 2 shots screamed into the soldier's chest. Armor ablated in a puff of smoke, and the force of the impact knocked the man from the ramp, turned his mask sideways on his face. He hit the deck and lay there, scrabbling for cover. Zirid fired again, and a hit to the man's midsection made him go still. The Twi'lek got her blasters clear and fired 2, 4, 6 shots at Zirid. Aaron slid before him, and her blade deflected all the shots, 2 of them back at the other soldier, which opened small holes in the soldier's mask. He fell forward onto the ramp, dead. Get out of here, Zirid, Aaron said over her shoulder. She started walking toward the shuttle, toward the Twi'lek. Aaron, Zirid called, but she did not hear him. He imagined she heard only the voice of her dead master now. Zirid realized it was no longer his fight. He holstered his blaster and watched. There was nothing else he could do. Aaron strode toward the shuttle while the Twi'lek backed up the landing ramp, taking aim. Before the Twi'lek could fire, Aaron gestured with her left hand, and both of the blasters flew from the Twi'lek's hands and landed at Aaron's feet. The Twi'lek mouthed something lost in the muffle of her mask. Aaron stepped over and passed the blasters. The Twi'lek, wide-eyed, turned to flee into the shuttle's compartment. Again, Aaron gestured, and a blast of power went forth from her, slammed into the Twi'lek's back, and drove her hard into the bulkhead. She collapsed within the shuttle's compartment, only her feet sticking out far enough for Zirid to see. Aaron deactivated her blade. She stopped for a moment and lowered her head, thinking. Zirid let himself hope, almost called her name again. But then she raised her head and walked for the landing ramp, stepping over the corpse of the shoulder. Zirid hung his head for a moment, saddened. It was her decision, her fight. He gathered himself, turned, and shouted at T7. Get that dragonfly open, T7. It's time to go. Vrath awoke to the sound of blaster fire, the high-pitched whine of sirens, and the voice on the port's speaker system saying something about a fuel leak. He'd taken a sleep tab to put him out, and it took a few moments for his head to clear. He'd fallen asleep in the cockpit. He checked his chrono, almost dawn, or just after. He'd been out the better part of the night. Something thudded into Razor's hull, a blaster shot. What in the... He undimmed the cockpit's transparisteel canopy and looked out on the landing pad. Razor's angle offered him a very small field of vision, so he could see little, merely part of one of the Imperial shuttles docked near him. Strangely, he saw no workers, no Imperial soldiers, no droids. He heard a few more blaster shots from behind the ship. He had no idea what was going on and had no desire to find out. He did not yet have permission to leave Coruscant, but he would not leave his ship in dock in the midst of a firefight or whatever was happening out there. He figured he'd just take Razor into the air and stay in atmosphere. He put the dull monotone of the spaceport's automated announcement on his in-ship comm. A hazardous substance spill has occurred in Landing Bay 16B. There is significant danger. Please move rapidly toward the nearest exit. A hazardous substance spill. On the wall near him, written in large black letters, were the words Landing Bay 16B. He double-checked to ensure Razor was still sealed tight. It wasn't. The rear door was open. He cursed. He swore he'd closed it. He hit the button to close it, but it still flashed as unsealed and open. Something was keeping it open, or there was a malfunction in the circuit. He would have to close it with the rear switch, or cargo would fall out as he flew. He started Razor's auto-launch sequence, rose, and headed for the rear of the ship. Halfway there, he realized he'd left his blaster and blades in the cockpit. He'd stripped them off when he'd grabbed some shut-eye. No matter, he wouldn't need them. Erin felt lightheaded as she walked up the shuttle's landing ramp. She held her lightsaber hilt in her hand, held anger in her heart. She slowed when the Twi'lek stirred, groaned, and turned over to watch her approach. Erin held up her free hand and almost said, "I won't hurt you," but walled off the words before they escaped her mouth. She did not want to lie. The woman scrabbled backward, crabwise, eyes showing no fear, taking Erin in until she bumped into the bulkhead. She slid up the wall so that she was standing. Erin stopped 2 paces from her. They regarded each other across the limitless gulf of their respective understandings. Outside, the sirens howled. Erin could no longer see Zirid. More important, he could no longer see her. The Twi'lek's eyes fell to Erin's lightsaber hilt. Erin felt no fear radiating from the woman, just a soft, profound sadness. "You have come to kill me." Erin did not deny it. Her mouth was dry. She belted her own lightsaber, took Master Zalo's in hand. "I see your anger," said the Twi'lek said. Erin thought of Master Zalo and hardened her resolve. You don't know me, woman. Do not pretend that you do." She ignited Master Zalo's lightsaber. The Twi'lek's eyes widened, and a flash of fear cracked her calm facade. "I don't," the Twi'lek acknowledged, "but I know anger when I see it. I know it quite well." A sad smile illuminated her face, overcoming the fear in her expression. She was thinking of something or someone other than Erin, and the sadness she radiated increased, sharpened. "Anger is just pain renamed," she said. "This I know well, too, and sometimes the pain runs too deep. Pain drives you, yes?" Erin had expected resistance, a fight, a protest, something. Instead, the Twi'lek seemed resigned. "You will kill me, Jedi? Because of Darth Malgus? Something he did?" Hearing Malgus's name uttered stoked the heat of Erin's anger. "He hurt someone I loved." The Twi'lek nodded, gave a single short outburst that might have been a pained laugh. "He hurts even those he himself loves," she smiled, and her soft voice sounded like rainfall. These men and their wars. His name is Varadin, Jedi, and he would kill me if he knew I told you, but names are important. Erin had to work to keep hold of her anger. The Twi'lek seemed so fragile, so hurt. I don't care what his name is. You were there with him in the attack on the temple. I saw it. The temple. Ah, she nodded. Yes, I was with him. I love him. I fight at his side. You would do the same. Erin could not deny it. She would have done the same. She had done the same. The anger she'd carried since feeling Master Zalo's death began to shrink, to drain out of her in the face of the Twi'lek's pain and sadness, in the realization that her own pain was not the moral center of the universe. The loss of her anger startled her. Since his death, she had been nothing but anger. Without it, she felt empty. Pain by another name, the Twi'lek had said. Indeed. Please be quick, the Twi'lek said. A clean death, yes? The words sounded not so much like a challenge as a request. What is your name? Erin asked. Alina, the Twi'lek said. Erin stepped toward her. Alina's eyes went to Erin's blade, but she did not shrink from Erin's approach. She stared into Erin's eyes and Erin into hers, each measuring the other's pain, the other's loss. Names are important, Erin said. She flipped her grip on her dead master's lightsaber, deactivated the blade, and slammed the pommel against Alina's temple. The Twi'lek collapsed without a sound. And I won't kill you, Alina. In some ways, Alina was already dead. Erin pitied her. She still felt compelled to avenge Master Zalo, but she could not murder Alina to make Malgus suffer. Master Zalo would never have countenanced it. Erin could not avenge him by betraying what he stood for. Perhaps he had failed. Perhaps the Order had failed, but both had failed nobly. There was something to that. She remembered the dream she'd had of Master Zalo, of him standing on the temple's ruins, silently mouthing words at her that she could not then understand. She understood them now. Be true to yourself, he had said. Hadn't Zirid been trying to tell her the same thing all along? I am sorry, my Lord Kersey. My lord, Kersey said, as he hurried to the spaceport. I assumed that they had evacuated and we had not yet had a chance to take a head count. Save your excuses, Kersey, Malgus said, and resisted the urge to cut the man in two. The long main corridor within the port felt kilometers long. Counters lined it, businesses, even vendors' carts, all of them abandoned. Vid screens sat dark on the walls of the lounges and clubs. Smaller corridors branched off the main one, leading to commercial passenger paths, to lifts that led to the large craft staging areas, and to the small craft paths. Move, Malgus said to them, and they did. To Kersey he said, Show me where you saw her last. Kersey pointed to a side corridor far ahead, near the end of the main corridor. It's there, my lord, pad 16B on the left. Malgus thought 16B was close to the launch doors he had seen open upon his arrival at the spaceport. He augmented his speed with the Force and blazed along the hall, leaving the soldiers far behind. The walls, signs, and floor were a blur to him as he sped toward the landing pad, toward Alina. T7 had the rear hatch open on the Dragonfly and was still plugged into the control panel. Zirid spent a few long moments turning his head from the Dragonfly to the Imperial shuttle, where Erin had disappeared with the Twi'lek, then back again. He finally started to head to for the Dragonfly, but Erin's voice pulled him around. Zirid! He turned to see Erin emerge from the shuttle, carrying the still body of the Twi'lek in her arms. Zirid could not tell whether the Twi'lek was dead or alive. He walked toward Erin slowly, his eyes not on the Twi'lek, but on Erin. Do I want to know? He dreaded the answer. I didn't kill her, Zirid. It was important for me to me that you knew that. Zirid let himself breathe. Breathe. I'm glad, Aaron. Then you'll come with me now? He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. T7 has a dragonfly open. I can't, Zirid, but I'm all right now. Do you understand? I don't, no. Erin opened her mouth to speak, stopped and cocked her head as if she heard something from far off. He's coming, she said. The hairs on the back of Zirid's neck rose. Who's coming? Malgus? Erin knelt and laid the Twi'lek down as gently as she might a newborn child. The siren suddenly stopped wailing, the sound cut off as if by a razor. The unexpected silence felt ominous. Zirid eyed the open double doors of the landing pad. A dark corridor stretched beyond them. Erin rose, closed her eyes, inhaled. Go, Zirid, she said. I'm not leaving, Zirid said, and drew his other blaster. He ran his tongue over lips gone dry. She opened her eyes and grabbed him with her gaze. You are leaving, and you're leaving now, Z-Man. Think of your daughter. Go right now. Go. Be a farmer. She smiled and pushed him away. He stared into her face, knowing she was right. He could not make Ara an orphan, not even for Erin. Still, he was unwilling to leave her. He stepped closer to her, and her expression softened. She reached up and touched his face. Go. Driven by nothing more than impulse, he grabbed her by the shoulders and kissed her full on the mouth. She did not resist, even returned it. He held her away from him at arm's length. You're a fool, Aaron Lanier, he said. Maybe. He turned and headed for the dragonfly, the feel of her lips lingering on his, a ghost of softness he hoped would haunt him forever. He only wished he had kissed her longer. He imagined her eyes on him, and he dared not look back for fear of losing his will to leave. He thought of the hollow of Ara he used to keep on Fat Man, her smile, her laugh, though thought of her smile, her laugh, thought of his promise to Nat that he would not take unnecessary chances. Hard as it was, he kept his back turned to Aaron Lanier. Get aboard, T7, he said as he walked up the landing ramp. T7 beeped a sad negative. You're not coming? Again, a sad negative. Zirid patted the droid on his head. You're a brave one. Thank you for your help. Take care of Aaron. T7 whistled an affirmative, followed that with a somber farewell, and wheeled away from the dragonfly. The ship's engines were already winding up. T7 must have started the launch sequence. Vrath picked his way through Razor's narrow corridors until he reached the rear compartment, which he'd converted from troop carrier to cargo hold. Stacked crates magnetically sealed to the deck dotted the hold, forming a rat's maze. He hurried through it to the rear door. The firefight outside seemed to have abated, so he allowed himself to relax. Zirid watched T7 move away. He hit the control panel to close the rear door, and it began to rise. He waited until the latches sealed. Still thinking of Aaron, he put his hand on the cold metal of the door. The dragonfly lurched as it rose on its thrusters. He needed to get to the cockpit. He could not have the autopilot flying the ship when the Imperials started shooting. He hurried through the converted cargo bay, made into a labyrinth by the many storage crates that dotted it. Rounding a corner, he nearly bumped into another man. It took a moment for recognition to dawn. The small frame, the neatly parted dark hair, the deep sockets with their dead eyes, the thin mouth. It was the man from Carson's Park. It was the man who had betrayed Zirid and Aaron to the Sith. It was the man who knew about Ara and Nat. You, Vrath Zizzer said. Me, Zirid affirmed. Aaron watched the dragonfly lift off, missing Zirid already. She tried to summon the rage that had brought her to Coruscant to face Malgus, but she no longer felt the same heat. She reached into her pocket, found the bead from the Nautolan bracelet, held it between forefinger and thumb. She would face Malgus. She had to, but she would face him as her master would have wished, with calmness in her heart. She stood over Alina's body and waited. Malgus's presence pressed against her as he drew nearer. His anger went before him like a storm. Malgus rushed through the large double doors and into the landing bay. Vrath Zizzer's ship, Razor, rose on its thrusters toward the open roof doors. 2 Imperial shuttles sat idle on the landing pad. "Alina!" he shouted, hating himself for his vulnerability, but unable to contain the shout. He reached out with a force as Razor continued its rise, tried to take it in his mental grasp. Its ascent slowed. He held forth both of his arms, made claws of his hands, and shouted with frustration as he sought to hold back the power of the ship's thrusters. He felt a tightness in his mind, the string of his power being drawn taut, stretching. He would not release the ship. Its thrusters began to whine. He held it, teeth gritted, sweat soaking his body, his breath a dry rattle through his respirator. And then the string snapped and the ship flew free, lifting clear of the roof doors. He roared his rage as the ship's engines fired and headed for the heavens. Seething, he activated his wrist chrono. "Jard, the Spice Runner's dropship has just left the Liston spaceport. Alina may be aboard. Secure it with a tractor beam and detain everyone aboard." The hum of an activating lightsaber cut off his words. Another followed it. He looked across the landing pad and saw Aaron Lanier, a lightsaber in each hand, standing over the body of Alina. And that's the end of that chapter. So we're on to chapter 13. We're 89% through the book, so we shouldn't be that long. Let me just flip ahead a couple pages here. "17 pages for that chapter. And 15 for the epilogue. But we're going to finish it tonight, even if I have to take a break. Okay, chapter 13. Pause. The pure hate and raw rage pouring off Malgus struck Erin like a physical blow. She braced herself against it as she might a hailstorm. She realized how strongly he felt for the Twi'lek, how he sublimated all of his emotion for her into hate and rage. He ignited his lightsaber, and his eyes and the plates of his armor reflected its red glow. He reached a hand behind him, made a sharp cutting gesture, and the doors to the hangar slammed closed. Another gesture, and the emergency locks turned in place. "Just us," he said, his voice as rough as a rasp. He had not taken his eyes from Alina. Aaron indicated the Twi'lek. "She is alive, Sith, and I know your feelings for her." "You know nothing," Malgus said, and took a slow step toward her. "Let the drop ship go. Give the order, or I will kill her." "You lie." Aaron placed Master Zalo's blade at Alina's neck. Raw emotion surged out of Malgus, a gust of rage. "I promise you I will do it," Aaron said. Malgus's free hand clenched into a fist. "If you have harmed her permanently, I will see that you suffer. I promise you that." Aaron understood less and less about Malgus with each word he spoke. Still, she maintained her bluff. "Give the order, Malgus." Malgus glared at her, snarled, spoke into his comlink. "Jard, belay my previous order. The dropship is to be allowed to leave the system." "My lord?" "Do it, Jard." "Yes, my lord." Malgus walked toward Aaron, the slow movements of a hunter that smelled prey. "And now, Jedi, you cannot leave here." "I don't want to leave, Malgus." His eyes smiled. "No, you want to kill me. Need to, yes? Because of your master?" The feelings the words mined out of the dark parts of her soul felt uncomfortably close to the rage flowing from Malgus. A day earlier, and her feelings might have mirrored his. That they didn't, she owed to Alina, and Zirid, and Master Zalo. I wanted to hurt you, Sith. Hurt you by hurting her, but I won't add to her pain. She suffers enough already. Malgus stopped in his advance. His eyes went to the Twi'lek, and to her surprise, Aaron felt something akin to pity radiate from him. Just a flash, quickly washed away by hate. Enough words, he said, returning his gaze to Aaron. Make your attempt, Aaron Lanier. I am here. He discarded his cape, stood up straight, and saluted her with his lightsaber. She hefted her lightsaber, Master Zalo's lightsaber, felt the weight of both in her hands. She fell into the lines of the Force, at peace, calm. Still heart, still mind. She had trained in dual lightsaber combat when she had been a Padawan, but she rarely fought with two blades in a genuine combat situation. She would now, here, today. She thought it fitting that she do so. She did not wait for Malgus. She bounded across the hangar, her speed augmented by the Force, the lines of her blades leaving a blur of light in their wake. Malgus held his ground, blade ready. She stabbed low with her primary blade, high with her secondary. Malgus leapt over both, flipped, landed behind her, and cross-cut for her neck. She ducked under it while spinning into a reverse leg sweep that caught his feet and tripped him. When he hit the ground, she rose, turned, raised both blades, and drove them down in a parallel overhand slash. Malgus somersaulted backward, and Aaron's blades cut gashes in the floor of the hangar. Sparks flew. Malgus bounced up from the somersault and loosed a telekinetic blast that lifted Aaron from her feet and blew her across the hangar. She slammed into one of the shuttle's bulkheads, but used the Force to cushion the blow so that it did no harm. Bouncing off the cool metal, she charged Malgus. As she ran, she cast first her own lightsaber at Malgus, then Master Zalo's, using the Force to guide both. The attack caught Malgus unprepared, and Aaron's blade bit into his armor. Sparks flew, and Malgus winced, snarled with pain. He ducked under Master Zalo's blade, and Aaron recalled both to her hands as she ran. The moment she had them, she cast them both out at Malgus again. But this time he was ready. Augmenting his speed with the Force, he flipped high into the air and out of the way of both. She anticipated his move, however, bounded forward to cut him off, and landed a flying kick to his chest. He used the Force to diminish the blow's impact, but it drove him back a step, and she heard his breathing hitch through the sound of his respirator. He recovered, roared, raised his blade high to cut her in two, and brought it down, but she had already summoned her own blade back to her hand and interposed it in a parry. Malgus's strength drove her to her knees. She held out her other hand and pulled Master Zalo's blade to her hand, stabbed for his stomach with it. Malgus sidestepped the stab, though it skinned his armor and showered sparks. He pushed her blade to the side with his own and kicked her in the face. The strength behind the blow blew through her defenses, caused her to see stars, loosed teeth, and sent her head over heels backward. She landed on her knees, stunned, seeing double. She rose, swayed on her feet, seeing 4 blades in her hands rather than 2. Something was in her mouth, and she spat it out. A tooth, the root forked and bloody. "You are a child to hate," Malgus said, his tone incongruously soft as he stalked toward her. "Your anger barely smolders. You are a fraction of what you could be." She needed time to recover her senses, some distance from Malgus. She backflipped high into the air and landed atop the Imperial shuttle. Her mind was beginning to clear. "Your master was also misguided. He thought to defeat me with calm, but failed. You thought to defeat me with anger, but carry too little despite your loss." Aaron's vision began to clear. She felt more herself. Be grateful for that, Jedi. Anger exacts its own price. Again she felt the odd sense of sympathy or pity adulterating the otherwise pure hate flowing from Malgus. His eyes went to Alina. Her body crumpled on the landing pad's floor. As Aaron prepared to leap at Malgus, he held forth a hand, almost casually, and lightning sizzled through the space between them. Aaron interposed her lightsabers, but the power in the lightning exceeded anything she had felt from Malgus before. It blasted through her defenses, and both lightsabers flew from her hands. The lightning seized her, lifted her up, and threw her from the top of the shuttle. As she flew toward the deck, she smelled burning flesh, heard screaming, realized that it was her flesh, her screams. She hit the ground hard, and her head bounced off the ground. Sparks erupted in her brain. Pain and everything went black. Okay. Zirad's military training responded faster than his thoughts. He made a knife of his right hand and drove it at the small man's throat, but Vrath too must have been trained. A sweeping side block with his left hand threw Zirad's arm out wide. Then Vrath seized the arm by the wrist, shifted his feet to get him closer to Zirad, and rotated into a hip toss. Zirad saw it coming, rode with the throw, hit the ground in a roll, and came up with his E9 drawn and aimed. A kick from Vrath sent the blaster flying, and it discharged into the bulkhead. Vrath followed the side kick into a spinning back kick, but Zirad anticipated it, took the blow to the side to capture the leg, stood and drove his fist into the man's nose. Bone crunched and blood exploded outward. Vrath flailed wildly with his left hand, driving his straightened fingers into Zirad's throat, a blow that would have killed him if the man had been able to put more into it. As it was, the blow caused Zirad to release Vrath's leg and recoil. Zirad reached behind his back for his second blaster and started to pull it loose, but Vrath charged him before Zirad could bring it to bear, drove Zirad up against one of the cargo crates. The sharp point of the crate's corner pressed into Zirad's back, and he grunted at the pain. Vrath's hand snaked around Zirad's, caught him by the wrist, levered it, and slammed it against the crate. The second blaster fell to the floor, and the man kicked it away. Zirad grunted with the effort and shoved Vrath away from him. They regarded each other from 3 paces, both gasping. Vrath's eyes watered, blood poured out of his nose. Zirad had trouble breathing through his damaged trachea. "Guess it had to come to this," the man said, his voice made nasal by his broken nose. "Didn't it, Zirad Kor?" He covered first one nostril, then the other, blowing out blood and snot in turn. "I'm Vrath, by the way, Vrath Zizzer." Zirad barely heard him. He took the time Vrath had used to clear his nose, to recover his own breath, and eye the floor for either blaster. Both weapons had disappeared under crates during the scrum. Vrath felt the damage to his nose with a 2-fingered pincer. "What are you, Harriers? Commandos?" Zirad's breathing cleared, and the 2-man began to circle. "Havoc Squadron," Zirad said, sizing up the smaller man. "First in," Vrath said, reciting one of the squad's mottos. "You?" Zirad asked. "Imperial Sniper Corps." "A skulker," Zirad said. Vrath lost his smile at the insult. "I killed over 50 men in a Republic uniform, Corps. You'll be just another number to me." "We'll see," Zirad said, as calm as the quiet moments before a thunderstorm. Vrath fainted, drawing a response from Zirad. Vrath grinned, his teeth bloody with runoff from his nose. "Jumpy, yeah?" Zirad watched for an opening as they circled. When he saw one, he feinted high and lunged in low, thinking to take Vrath down, where Zirad's size would give him the advantage. Vrath sprawled to avoid the takedown, but Zirad used his weight to drive him up against the bulkhead. Vrath threw a short elbow, grazing Zirad's head, another catching him on the cheek. Grunting, Zirid pushed himself away from the smaller man to get some room to work. When he had it, still holding Vrath's arms, he put a knee into his abdomen. Another. Vrath grunted, turned his body to keep his hips in the way. Vrath's fingers slid on Zirid's shoulder, up Zirid's shoulder to his face, toward his eyes. Zirid shook his head, but Vrath's fingers found the sockets, started to burrow. Vrath shoved him away and backed off, blinking, covering his retreat with a front kick. Vrath lunged at him, seized him around the thighs, lifted him off the ground, and threw him back down. Zirid's head hit the deck hard, and he saw stars. Vrath squirmed to top him, fast, elusive, his arms and legs everywhere, wrapping Zirid up. Soon he had his body atop Zirid. Elbows and fists poured down, one after another. Zirid took a blow to the cheek, the temple, another to the cheek, the top of his head. The last opened him up, and blood ran warm and slick down his pate, smeared his face, darkened Vrath's elbow. Desperate, he reached for Vrath's arm, but the man was too fast, and the blood made his skin slick, more difficult to get a grip. Zirid wrapped his arms around Vrath's back, pulled him close to disallow him the room he needed to ply his elbows. And then Vrath made a mistake. Trying to pull himself back up to loose more elbows, he put his face above Zirid's with only a few centimeters between them, and Zirid threw his head up and slammed his brow into Vrath's already broken nose. Vrath cried out in pain, instinctively recoiled. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Zirid seized one of Vrath's wrists, rolled him over, threw his legs on either side of Vrath's shoulder, extended Vrath's arm, then extended his own body to lever the arm at the elbow. Vrath screamed at the hyperextension, turned into an audible break. The arm went loose in Zirid's grasp. The joint shattered. He released Vrath's elbow, rolled and bounded to his feet. Vrath, his face twisted in pain, crawled for where the E9 had disappeared under a crate. Zirid cut him off, picked him off the floor, and shoved him hard toward the bulkhead. Vrath careered into the metal wall, off kilter. He tried to catch himself with his broken arm, but it just hung limp from the joint, and he caught the side of his head flush. His eyes rolled, and he went down in a heap. Zirid jumped atop him, punched him square in the eye, thinking he was only stunned, but the man stayed limp beneath him. Blood dripped from Zirid's head onto Vrath's face. Gasping, Zirid checked Vrath's pulse. Still alive. All at once, the adrenaline that had fueled him during the combat drained out of him. His entire body ached. His breath came ragged, and he had no strength. Stabs of pain in his face and head echoed each beat of his heart. The entire fight had taken maybe 40 seconds. He felt as if he'd been beaten for hours. He stared down at Vrath, wondering what to do with him. He searched the man's pants, jacket, coat. He found several IDs and other personal items. He also found flex binders. He flipped Vrath over and pulled his arms behind him. He felt the bones in the broken arm grind together, and Vrath groaned. Sorry, Zirid said. There was nothing he could do about the arm. Once he had the man's arms secured, he slung him over his shoulders and carried him on shaky legs through the ship to the cockpit. A dragonfly had no brig, and there was no way Zirid was letting Vrath out of his sight. By the time he reached the cockpit, the ship had cleared the spaceport and angled upward for the atmosphere. Zirid studied the instrumentation. His face was swelling, and his eye was damaged from Vrath's fingers, so he had to squint. He took off his shirt and used it to apply pressure to his head wound. He didn't want to bleed all over the controls. A weapons belt with a GH-22 blaster and several knives lay on the pilot's seat. Vrath's weapons, presumably. Zirid belted them on and sat. He'd never flown a Dragonfly-class dropship before, but he could fly any niffing thing that tramped the stars. He'd need to get past the Imperial blockade and get into a hyperspace lane. Time to dance between the raindrops, he said, and disengaged the autopilot. He looked down out of the canopy at the spaceport far below, wondering what had happened with Erin. He'd have paid a lot of credits to have her beside him right then. Erin opened her eyes. Malgus stood over her, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her face. He held the Twi'lek, still unconscious, in his arms. He also held both of Erin's lightsabers. His own lightsaber hilt hung from his belt. He had not killed her. She had no idea why. He stared down at her, and she felt his ambivalence. He was struggling with something. Take them and go, he said, and dropped both of her lightsabers. They hit the floor in the clatter. Take the shuttle. I will ensure you have safe passage away from Coruscant. She did not move. The lightsabers were centimeters from her hand. His eyes narrowed. Unless you need to avenge your master, your need to avenge your master requires you to die, you should do as I command, Jedi. She pushed herself up with one hand, took both of the lightsabers in the other. The metal was cool in her palm. Why? Because you spared her, he said, his voice soft behind the respirator. Were our situations reversed, I would not have done so, because your presence made me aware of something I should have known long ago. Erin rose, still cautious, and clipped the lightsabers to her belt. We will be leaving Coruscant, you know, he said almost sadly. The Empire, I mean. All that remains is to sign the treaty. Then we will have peace. Does that please you? Please me? She still did not understand. She inventoried her injuries, lots of bruises and lacerations, nothing broken. She inventoried her soul, nothing broken there either. She looked into Malgus's face. She did not know what to say. Perhaps we will meet again under other circumstances. If we meet again, Erin Lanier, Malgus said, I will kill you as I did your master. Do not mistake my actions for mercy. I am repaying a debt. When you leave here, it is paid. Erin licked her lips, stared him in the face, and nodded. Do you know your own order betrayed you, Jedi? He said. They informed us that you might be coming here. Erin was not surprised, but the betrayal still hurt. I no longer belong to an order, she said, her throat tight. He laughed and sounded the sound like a hacking cough. Then we have more in common than anger, he said. Now go. She did not understand and resigned herself to never understanding. She turned, still disbelieving, and headed for the shuttle. T-7 emerged from hiding near the ship and beeped a question. She had no answer. Together they boarded the shuttle. When she reached the cockpit and sat, she realized that she was shaking. Still heart, still mind, she said, and felt calmer. Exhaling, she engaged the thrusters. She had no idea where she would go. As the blue of Coruscant's sky gave way to the black of space, Zirid started to sweat. He eyed the sensors for Imperial ships. They would have detected him by now. A cruiser showed on his screen, maybe Valor, maybe another one. He wheeled the dropship away from it, accelerated for the nearest hyperlane. He just wanted to jump somewhere, anywhere. A beep from the panel drew his attention. It took him a moment to realize it was a hail. It took him another moment to figure out how to operate it. He slapped the button, opening the channel. If nothing else, he'd curse out the Imperials before they shot him down. Dropship Razor, you are cleared to leave. Zirid assumed it had to be a ruse, a bad joke, but he saw nothing on the scanner and the cruiser did not move to interdict. He flew for the hyperlane. He let the Navicom calculate a course and tried to believe his luck. Vrath's voice startled him. Not bad, Commando. I'm impressed. Impressing you isn't my concern, skulker. Vrath chuckled, but it turned into a cough and a wince. There are pain pills in the med bay. You mind? Later, Zirid said. It hurts pretty bad, Marine. Good. It's just business, Core. Zirid thought of Ara, Nat, Erin. Right. Business. He'd had all he could take of business. We're done as far as I'm concerned, Vrath said. I was hired to stop that Engspice from getting to Coruscant. I did that, which means we're done. I report back and we never see each other again. I'd like my ship back, though. Zirid resisted the urge to punch a restrained man. He was behaving as if they'd just had a friendly sparring match, that they'd go out for drinks later. The exchange probably won't be as forgiving, though, Vrath said. I hear they don't tolerate lost shipments. You and your family are going to have a hard row now. Vrath's words made Zirid's breath hitch. Hearing them changed everything. His knuckles turned white on the stick as options played out in his mind. Adrenaline filled him to his eyes. He stared straight out the cockpit window. They don't know I have a family. Not yet, Vrath said, but they will. They always do. Too late, Vrath seemed to realize he'd stepped on a mine. He tried to chuckle it away, but Zirid heard the fear behind the laughter. Or maybe they won't. I'm just talking here. You talk too much, Zirid said, while he hardened his expression, hardened his mind. The alchemy of necessity distilled his list of options down to one. He put himself on autopilot and stood. On your feet, Vrath. When the man did not stand right off, Zirid pulled him roughly to his feet. Vrath groaned with pain. Easy there, Marine. Pain meds now, yeah? He sounded doubtful. Walk, Zirid said. To where? Zirid stuck the GH-22 in his back. Move. Reluctantly, Vrath let Zirid push him through the corridors of the ship. The man moved slowly, as if he knew Zirid's intent. And Zirid had to push him along. A few turns, a few corridors, and Zirid saw an airlock door. He steered Vrath to it, stopped before it. Turn around. Vrath did. His face was blotchy, but whether from the beating or from fear, Zirid could not tell. This is about your daughter, yeah? Well, I already told my people, Kor. They already know. Zirid heard the high pitch of a lie in Vrath's tone. A lie. You already told me you didn't. You said, not yet. He moved Vrath out of the way with the blaster and activated the internal doors on the airlock. They unsealed and slid open with a hiss. A red light set into the ceiling, lit up, and began to spin. Zirid showed him the blaster. You want this? He nodded at the airlock. Or that? Vrath looked at the weapon, the airlock, swallowed hard. It doesn't have to go this way, Kor. I won't tell anyone about your family. You can even keep the ship. I can't take that chance. Vrath tried to smile, but it looked like a death grimace. Come on, Kor. If I say I won't talk, I won't talk. I'm nothing if not a man of my word. Zirid thought of the promise he'd made to Nat, that he'd take no unnecessary chances. Yeah, me too. Desperation crept into Vrath's voice. He shifted on his feet. You'll have to bear this, Kor. This will make you a murderer. Kill a man with his own weapon? You want that weight? Zirid knew what he was doing, or at least he thought so. I can carry it, and I don't need a lecture about murder from a skulker. Fear made Vrath's eyes water. That was war, Kor. Think about it. Think hard. I have. Pick, or I pick for you. Just another number, right? Vrath stared at Zirid's face. Maybe he saw the blankness, the resolve. To hell with you, Kor. To hell with you. Zirid pushed him into the airlock. I could have killed her, Kor. Both of them, back at the park on Volta. You know I could have, but I didn't. No, Zirid said. You didn't. He activated the seal and the door started to close. I wish I had killed them now. I wish I had. Zirid stopped the door, a sudden flash of anger rekindling his strength. He reached into the airlock and grabbed Vrath by the shirt, shook him. If you had harmed her, this would be coming to you with a sharp blade and a slow touch. You hear me, skulker? Do you? He kicked Vrath in the stomach, doubling the man over with the blow. While Vrath gasped for breath, Zirid reactivated the door and it sealed shut. Vrath stared at him through the tiny transparent steel window, all wild eyes, snarls, and teeth. Zirid hit the button to evacuate the airlock. The warning alarm wailed. He gave one more glance at Vrath, saw the fear there, then he turned and walked back toward the cockpit. Murderer, that's what he was. The siren stopped, and he felt a soft rumble as the external airlock door opened. A pit opened in his stomach. Emotion, nameless and raw, caused his eyes to water. He wiped them clear. He was a murderer, and he felt heavy already. But he would carry it for Nat, for Ara. He expected he'd carry it for the rest of his life, and the weight would never diminish. He'd killed men before, but not like that. Not like he'd killed Vrath. For the first time he understood, really understood, why Aaron had returned to Coruscant. He prayed to gods he did not believe in that she reconsidered what she had come to do. She felt things too keenly to feel what he felt. She could never carry it. It would destroy her. Better she should die. All of a sudden, he just wanted to sleep. He overrode the Navicomp's random course and plugged in the coordinates to Volta. His hands shook the whole time. In moments, Razor jumped into hyperspace. He had always flown alone, but he'd never felt alone in the cockpit, not until that moment. Sitting back in the chair, he tried to sleep. And tried not to dream. We got to be near the end of this. Yeah. Okay. So we're almost at the end of this chapter. Malgus watched the shuttle, piloted by Aaron Lanier, rise on its thrusters. He raised Jard on the comm. "A shuttle is lifting off from Liston," he said. "It is also clear to leave Coruscant space." "Yes, my lord," Jard answered. And we've got another ad coming up. Malgus could have broken his word to the Jedi, could have shot Aaron Lanier from the sky, but he would not. He kept his promises. But he realized more than ever that the Jedi were too dangerous for him to allow them to exist. They were to the Sith what Alina was to him, an example of peace, of comfort, and therefore a temptation to weakness. Angral did not see it. The Emperor did not see it. But Malgus saw it, and he knew what he must do. He must destroy the Jedi utterly. He knelt beside Alina, cradled her head in his left arm. He studied her face, its symmetry, the line of her jaw, the deep-set eyes, and perfectly formed nose. He remembered the first time he had seen her, a cowed, beaten slave, barely out of her teens. Oh. And ad. Okay. Oh. I was sitting there reading, thinking the ad was getting ready to start. So I don't know where y'all left off. I'm going to go back to Malgus watched the shuttle, piloted by Aaron Lanier, rise on its thrusters. He raised Jard on the comm. "A shuttle is lifting off from Liston," he said. "It is also clear to leave Coruscant space." "Yes, my lord," Jard answered. Malgus could have broken his word to the Jedi, could have shot Aaron Lanier from the sky, but he would not. He kept his promises. But he realized more than ever that the Jedi were too dangerous for him to allow them to exist. They were to the Sith what Alina was to him, an example of peace, of comfort, and therefore a temptation to weakness. Angral did not see it. The Emperor did not see it. But Malgus saw it, and he knew what he must do. He must destroy the Jedi utterly. He knelt beside Alina, cradled her head in his left arm. He studied her face, its symmetry, the line of her jaw, the deep-set eyes, the perfectly formed nose. He remembered the first time he had seen her, a cowed, beaten slave barely out of her teens. He'd killed her owner for his brutality, taken her into his house, trained her in combat. She had been his companion, his lover, his conscience ever since. Her eyes fluttered open, focused. She smiled. "Varadin, you are my rescuer." "Yes," he said. "Where is the woman?" Alina asked. "The Jedi." "She is gone. She will never hurt you again." She leaned her head back into his arm, closed her eyes, and sighed contentedly. "I knew you loved me." "I do," he acknowledged, and her smile widened. He felt tears forming in his eyes, his weakness made manifest. She opened her eyes, saw the tears, reached up an arm to put a hand on his cheek. "What is wrong, my love?" That I love you is what is wrong, Elena. Varadin? He steeled himself, stood, ignited his lightsaber, and drove it through her heart. Her eyes widened, never left his face, pierced him. Her mouth opened in a surprised gasp. She seemed as if she wanted to say something, but no sound emerged from her mouth. And then it was over, and she was gone. He deactivated his blade. He could no longer afford a conscience or a weakness, not if he was to do what must be done. He could serve only one master. He stood over her body until his tears dried. He resolved that he'd never shed another. He'd had to destroy what he loved, and he knew he would have to do it again. First the Jedi, then... Behind him, Kersey and his soldiers were worrying at the landing bay doors, trying to cut their way in. Malgus knelt and picked up her limp body. She felt as light as gauze in his arms. He would give her a funeral with honor, and then he would begin. His vision on Korriban had shown him a galaxy in flames, but it was not just the Republic that required cleansing by fire. And that is the end of that chapter. So we have just the epilogue left, but I am going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back. We'll finish it up. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's another 14 pages to plus a paragraph to finish the epilogue. So I just want to take a quick break, and I will be right back. Okay, let's get back to it and finish out this book, shall we? We'll see what we're doing next. All right, epilogue. Night and controlled rage wrapped Malgus. His anger smoldered always now, and his thoughts mirrored the colliginous air. He had taken a ship in secret from the unknown regions, where he was currently stationed, and made his way to the planet. No one knew he had come. He focused on keeping his force signature suppressed. He did not want anyone to learn of his presence prematurely. A sliver of moon cut a narrow slit in the dark sky, painted everything in grays and blacks. The stone wall of the compound, 8 meters tall, rose before him, its surface as rough and pitted as Malgus's mane. Drawing on the force, he augmented a leap that carried him up and over the wall. He landed in a well-tended garden courtyard. Sculpted dwarf trees and bushes cast strange, malformed shadows in the moonlight. The gentle sound of a fountain mixed with the night hum of insects. Malgus moved through the garden, a deeper darkness among the shadows, his boots soft on the grass. A few lights lit the windows of the rectangular manse that sat in the center of the grounds. The manse, the garden, the fountain, all of it looked similar to some soft world in the Republic, some decadent Jedi sanctuary where so-called Force scholars pondered peace and sought tranquility. Malgus knew it was folly. Empires and the men who ruled empires could not stay sharp when surrounded by comfort, by peace, by love. Low voices sounded from ahead, barely audible in the stillness. Malgus did not slow and made no attempt to hide his approach as he emerged from the darkness of the garden. They saw him immediately, 2 Imperial troopers in half armor. They leveled their blaster rifles. Who in the... He drew on the force, gestured as if he were shooing away insects, and sent both of the troopers flying against the wall of the manse, hard enough to crack bone. Both sagged to the ground, unmoving. The black eyes of their helmets stared at Malgus. He walked between their bodies and through the sliding doors of the manse. I assume I'm pronouncing that right. It's M-A-N-S-E. Reminded of his attack on the Jedi Temple back on Coruscant. Except that Alina had accompanied him. It seemed a lifetime ago. Thinking of Alina blew oxygen on the embers of his anger. In life, Alina had been his weakness, a tool to be exploited by rivals. In death, she had become his strength, her memory the lens of his rage. He resided in the calm eye of a storm of hate. Power churned around him, within him. He did not feel as if he were drawing on the Force, using it. He felt as if he were the Force, as if he had merged with it. He had evolved. Nothing split his loyalties anymore. He served the Force and only the Force, and his understanding of it increased daily. The growing power whirling around him leaked through the lid of his control, made the suppression of his Force signature impossible. All at once he lowered all of the mental barriers, let the full force of his power roil around him. "Address!" he shouted, putting enough power into his voice to cause the ceiling and walls to vibrate. "Address!" He strode through the rooms and hallways of Address's retreat, toppling or destroying everything within reach. Antique desks, the bizarre erotic statuary favored by Address. Everything. He left ruin in his wake, all while shouting for Address to show himself. His voice rang off the walls. He rounded a corner to see a squad of 6 Imperial troopers in full armor, blaster rifles ready, the front 3 on one knee before the other 3. They had been waiting for him. His force-enhanced reflexes moved faster than their trigger fingers. Without slowing his pace, he pulled his lightsaber into his hand and activated as the blasters discharged. The red line of his weapon spun so fast in his hand it extended into a shield. 2 of the blaster shots ricocheted off his weapon and into the ceiling. He deflected the other 4 back at the troopers, putting black holes through 2 chests and 2 face masks. Another 2 strides, and a lunge brought him upon the surviving 2 troopers before they could fire again. He cross-cut, spun, and cross-cut again, killing both. He deactivated his lightsaber and continued on through the manse until he reached a large central hall, perhaps 15 meters wide and 25 long. Decorative wood columns that supported upper balconies lined its length at even intervals. A pair of double doors stood on the far side of the hall, opposite those Malgus had entered. Lord Adris stood within the open doorway. He wore a black cloak over his elaborate armor. Malgus, Adris said, his voice showing surprise, but his tone turning Malgus's name into an insult. You were in the unknown regions. I am in the unknown regions. Adris understood the implication. I knew you would come one day. Then you know I am here for you. Adris ignited his lightsaber, shed his cloak. For me, yes, he chuckled. I understand you, Malgus. Understand you quite well. You understand nothing, Malgus said, and stepped into the room. Malgus felt the hate pouring off Adris, the power, but it paled in comparison to the rage and hate roiling in Malgus. In his mind's eye he saw Alina's face as she died. It poured fuel on the flames of his rage. Adris too stepped into the room. Do you think that your presence here is a surprise, that I have not long foreseen this? Malgus chuckled, the sound loud off the high ceiling. You have foreseen it, but you cannot stop it. You are a child, Adris, and tonight you pay. Angral is not here to protect you. No one is. Adris scoffed. I have hidden my true power from you, Malgus. It is you who will not leave here. Then show me your power, Malgus said, sneering. Adris snarled and held forth his left hand. Force lightning crackled from his fingertips, filled the space between them. Malgus interposed his lightsaber, drew the lightning to it, and started walking toward Adris. The power swirled around the red blade, sizzling, crackling, pushed against Malgus, but he strode through it. The skin of his hands blistered, but Malgus endured the pain, paid it as the price of his cause. As he walked, he spun his blade in an arc above his head, gathering the lightning, then flung it back at Adris. It slammed into his chest, lifted him bodily from the ground, and threw him hard against the far wall. Is that your power? Malgus asked, still advancing, cloaked in rage. That is what you wish to show me? Adris climbed to his feet, his armor charred and smoking. A snarl split his face. Malgus picked up his pace, turned the walk into a charge. His boots thumped off the wood floor of the hall. He did not bother with finesse. He vented his rage in a continuous roar as he unleashed a furious series of blows, an overhand slash that Adris parried, a low stab that Adris barely sidestepped, a side kick that connected to Adris's side, broke ribs, and flung Adris fully across the narrow axis of the hall. He crashed into a column, and the impact split it as would lightning a tree. Adris growled as he climbed to his feet. Power gathered around him, a black storm of energy, and he leapt at Malgus, his blade held high. Malgus sneered, gestured, seized Adris in his power, and pulled him from the air at the apex of his leap. Adris hit the ground in a heap, his breath coming in wheezes. He climbed to all fours, then to his feet, favoring his side, his blade held limply before him. You hid nothing from me, Malgus said, and the power in his voice caused Adris to wince. You are a fool, Adris. Your skill is in politics, in currying favor with your betters. Your understanding of the Force is nothing compared to mine. Adris snarled, started to charge toward Malgus, a last-ditch attempt to salvage his dignity, if not his life. Malgus held forth his hand, and the rage within him manifested in blue veins of lightning that discharged from his fingertips and slammed into Adris. The power stopped Adris's charge cold, blew his lightsaber from his hand, caught him up in a cage of burning lightning. He screamed, squirming in frustration and pain. "End it, Malgus! End it!" Malgus unclenched his fingers and released the lightning. Adris fell to the ground, his flesh smoking, the skin of his once handsome face blistered and peeling. Again he rose to all fours and looked up at Malgus. "Angral will avenge me." "Angral will suspect what has happened here," Malgus said, and strode toward him. "But he will never know, not for certain, not until it's too late." "Too late for what?" Adris asked. Malgus did not answer. "You are mad," Adris said, and leapt to his feet and charged. He pulled his lightsaber to his fist and activated it. The attack took Malgus momentarily by surprise. Adris loosed a flurry of strikes, his blade a humming red blur as he spun, stabbed, slashed, and cut. Malgus backed off a single step, another, then held his ground, his own blade, and answered all of Adris's attacks. Adris shouted as he attacked, the sound that of desperation, filled with the knowledge that he was no match for Malgus. Finally, Malgus answered with an attack of his own, forcing Adris back with the power and speed of his blows. When he had Adris backed up against the wall, he cross-cut for his head. Adris ducked under, and Malgus cut a column in two. As the huge upper piece of the column crashed to the floor and the balcony lurched above them, Adris fell to one knee and stabbed at Malgus's chest. Malgus spun out of the way and rode the spin into a chop that severed Adris's arm at the elbow. Adris screamed and clutched his arm at the bicep while his forearm fell to the ground along with the column. Malgus had taught the lesson he'd come to teach. He deactivated his lightsaber, held up his left hand, and made a pincer of his fingers. Adris tried to use his own power to defend himself, but Malgus pushed through it and took telekinetic hold of Adris's throat. Adris gagged, the capillaries in his wide eyes beginning to pop. Malgus's power lifted Adris from the floor, his legs kicking, gasping. Malgus stood directly before Adris, his hate the vice closing on Adris's trachea. "You and Angral caused this, Adris, and the Emperor. There can be no peace with the Jedi, no truce." He clenched his fist. "There can be no peace at all, not ever." Adris's only answer was continued gagging. Seeing him there, hanging near death, Malgus thought of Alina, of Adris's description of her. He released Adris from the clutch of his force choke. Adris hit the ground on his back, gasping. Malgus had a knee on his chest and both hands on his throat before Adris could recover. He would kill Adris with his bare hands. "Look me in the eyes," he said, and made Adris look at him. "In the eyes." Adris's eyes showed petechial hemorrhaging, but Malgus knew he was coherent. "You called her a mongrel," Malgus said. He removed his gauntlets, took Adris by the throat, and began to squeeze. "To my face you called her that. Her." Adris blinked, his eyes watering. His mouth opened and closed with no sound, but no sound emerged. "You are the mongrel, Adris." Malgus bent low, nose to nose. "Angral's mongrel, and you and those like you have mongrelized the purity of the Empire with your pollution, trading strength for a wretched peace." Adris's trachea collapsed in Malgus's grip. There was no final cough or gag. Adris died in silence. Malgus rose and stood over Adris's body. He pulled on his gloves, adjusted his armor, his cloak, and walked out of the manse. Jeez, we have a lot left. Okay. The rising sun peeked over the mountains on Dantooine, and the thin clouds at the horizon line looked to have caught fire. Shadows stretched over the valley, gradually receding as the sun rose higher. The trees whispered in a breeze that bore the scent of loam, decaying fruit, and the recent rain. Zirid stood in the midst of the damp dirt and tall grass, under the open sky, and faced the fact that he had no idea whatsoever about what he should be doing. Probably sowing seeds, he supposed, or grafting vines, or testing the soil, or something, but it was all a guess. He glanced around as if there might be someone nearby whom he could ask for assistance, but the next nearest farm was 20 clicks to the west. He was on his own. Same as always, he said to himself with a smile. After getting clear of Coruscant, he'd flown to Volta, scooped up Nat and Ara, and fled deeper into the outer rim. There he'd sold Razor and its cargo on the black market, and with the credits he'd earned, bought Nat her own home, and bought him and Ara an old vineyard, long unused for growing, from an elderly couple. He'd become a farmer, of sorts, or at least a farm owner, just as he'd told Aaron he would. Thinking of Aaron, especially her eyes, made him smile, but the smile curled down under the weight of bad memories. He had never seen her again after leaving Coruscant. For a time he'd tried to learn what had happened to her, but a search of the holonet turned up nothing. He knew, however, that Darth Malgus had lived. He presumed that meant Aaron had not, and he'd been unable to tell Ara why Daddy sometimes cried. And he still secretly hoped the presumption was wrong, that she'd escaped somehow, remembered who she was. He thought of her every day, her smile, her hair, but especially her eyes. The understanding he saw in them had always drawn him to her. Still did, though he was drawn only to her memory now. He hoped she had found whatever she'd been seeking before the end. He looked around his new estate, at the large home he and Ara rattled around in, at the various outbuildings that held equipment he did not know how to operate, at the row upon row of trellises that lined the fallow vine fields, and he felt free. He owed no one anything, and the exchange would never find him, even if they somehow realized that he was still alive. He owned land, a home, and had enough credits left over to hire a crew that could help him turn the land into a decent winery within a year or two. Or maybe he'd convert the farm and grow tobacco. Months earlier he could not have imagined such a life for himself. Grinning like a fool, he sat down in the center of his plot of dirt and watched the sunrise. A black dot above the horizon drew his eye. A ship. He watched it, unconcerned, until it started to get larger. He could not yet make out its lines, but he could see its course. It was heading in his direction. A flash of panic seized him, but he fought it down. His eyes went to the house where Ara slept. He turned his gaze back to the ship. He disliked unidentified ships descending from the sky in his direction. They always reminded him of the gully jumper he'd watched crash into the Jedi Temple. They always reminded him of Aaron. They could not have found us, he said. It is nothing. The ship grew still larger as it closed to the distance. It was moving fast. From the tri-wing design, he made it as a BT-7 Thunderstrike, a multi-use ship common even out on the rim. He stood as it closed. He could hear the deep bass hum of its engines. Daddy? Ara's voice turned his head around. She had come out of the house and sat on the wooden swing chair on the covered porch of the house. She smiled and waved. The rain's gone, she said. Get in the house, Ara, he shouted, pointing at the door. But, Daddy, get inside right now. He did not bother to see if she complied. The ship probably had not seen him yet. The trellises and their veins of browning vines would have concealed him from an airborne viewer. He ducked low and darted toward the edge of the field, sheltering as best he could behind one of the trellises. He pulled some dead vines from it so that he could look through to the open area at the edge of the field where the ship was likely to put down, if it was coming to his farm. He spared a glance back at the ship and saw that Ara had gone back inside. He reached down to his ankle holster and pulled out the E3 he kept there, then reached around the small of his back for the E9 he kept there. He chided himself for not wearing his ordinary hip holster with its twin Blastech 4s. Ara disliked seeing the weapons, so he'd taken to wearing only those he could carry in concealed holsters. But little E-series pop guns would have trouble doing much to someone in ablative armor. Again, if the ship was coming to his farm. The ship came into view, and he noted its lack of markings. Not a good sign. It slowed, circled the farm, and he tried to make himself small. Its engines slowed and its thrusters engaged. It was coming down. He cursed, and cursed. Tension coiled within him, but he still felt the habitual calm that always served him well in combat. He reminded himself not to shoot until he knew what he was facing. It was possible that whoever was in the thunderstrike intended him no harm. Another local, maybe, or an official in an unmarked ship. But he doubted it. If they were agents of the exchange, he wanted to take at least one alive to find out how they'd tracked him down. The ship set down, its skids sinking into the wet ground. The engines wound down, but did not turn off. He could see the pilot through the transparisteel canopy, a human man in the jacket, helmet, and glasses that seemed to be the bush pilot uniform out on the rim. He was talking to someone or someone's in the rear compartment, but Zirid could not see who. He heard the doors on the far side of the ship slide open, then close. He still could not see anyone. The ship's engines wound back up slightly. The thrusters engaged, and it started to lift off. He gave it a few seconds to get up in the air and engage its engines fully, then stepped out from behind the trellis. A single figure walked toward his home. A human woman with short hair, dressed in baggy trousers and a short coat. He leveled both blasters at her back. Do not take another step. She stopped and held out her hands to either side. He started to circle so he could see her face. Are you going to shoot at me every time we meet? The sound of her voice stopped him in his tracks, sent his heart racing, stole his breath. Aaron? She turned, and it was her. He could not believe it. The first words out of his mouth were ridiculous. Your hair! She ran her hand through her shorn hair. Yeah, I needed a change. He heard the seriousness in her tone and answered in kind as he walked toward her. His legs felt unsteady under him. I know what you mean. She smiled softly, and it was the same as if had ever been, as warm as the rising sun. I looked everywhere for you, she said. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I looked for you too, he said, but there was nothing. I watched every holo story about the Jedi. It said they were leaving Coruscant. Her expression fell. I resigned from the Order, Zirid. He stopped in his tracks. You what? I resigned. Like I said, I needed a change. I thought you meant your hair. She smiled at that too, then indicated the blasters with her eyes. Are you going to put those away? He felt himself color. Of course. I mean, yes, right. He holstered both of his weapons, hands shaking. How did you find me? You said you'd become a farmer on Dantooine. She held her arms out to the side, indicating the landscape, and here you are. And here I am. Don't worry, she said, anticipating his concern. No one else could find you. Just me. Just you? Just you. He was smiling stupidly, echoing her words, and probably looking like a fool. He didn't care. She was smiling too, and he could take no more. Stang, Aaron, he said. He ran toward her and scooped her into his arms. She returned his embrace and he pulled her tighter, felt her body against his. I don't like reading these kinds of things out loud. inhaled the smell of her hair. He enjoyed the moment, then held her at arm's length. Wait, how did you get off Coruscant? Malgus? She nodded. We reached an understanding of sorts. He wanted to ask about the Twi'lek, but was afraid of the answer. Perhaps she felt his emotional turmoil, or perhaps she knew him well enough to anticipate the question. Even after you left, I did not hurt her. Alina, I mean. I left her with Malgus. I don't know if I did her any favors, though. He hugged her again, more relieved than he would have expected. I'm glad, Aaron. I'm glad you did that, and I'm glad you're here. Tears leaked from his eyes. He was not sure why. She pushed him back and studied his face. What is it? You're upset. Words pushed up his throat, but he kept them behind his teeth. He remembered the airlock on Razor, but shook his head. Wrath was his weight to carry. It's nothing. I'm just glad to see you. An understanding with Malgus? What does that mean? He let me go. He what? Aaron nodded. He let me go. I still don't understand why, not fully. Are you still hunting him? A shadow passed over Aaron's expression, but her soft smile brightened her face and chased it away. She put her fingers on a necklace she wore. A stone hung from a silver chain. Zirad thought it was a Nautolan jewel of some kind. No, I'm not hunting him. When I faced him, I felt his hate, his rage. She shuddered, wrapped her arms around her slim body. It was like nothing I'd encountered in a Sith before. He lives in a dark place, and I did not want to follow him there. Zirad understood better than she knew. He lived in his own dark place. You don't want to carry that, he said to himself. No, she said, I don't want to carry that. He shook off the darkness and forced a smile. Will you be staying for a while? Before Aaron could answer, Ara's voice carried from the house. Daddy, can I come out now? He waved her out, and she threw open the door, bounded across the porch, down the stairs, and across the swath. Aaron grabbed him by the arm. She's running, Zirad. Prosthetics, he said, and his eyes swelled anew to see her running toward him with Aaron at his side. When Ara reached them, she stopped before them, out of breath, her curly hair mussed, her eyes curious, and her smile wide. She extended a small hand, all serious. Hello, my name is Ara. Aaron knelt down to look her in the eye. Taking her hand, she said, I'm Aaron. Hello, Ara. It's nice to meet you. You have pretty eyes, Ara said. Thank you. Zirad spoke his hopes aloud. I think Aaron is going to stay with us for a while. Won't that be nice? Ara nodded. Aren't you, Aaron? Staying for a while? Aaron rose, and Zirad's hopes rose with her. Fragile, ready to be dashed. When she looked at him and nodded, he grinned like a fool. Do you like to play grav ball? Ara asked her. You can teach me, Aaron said. How about some food? Zirad said. Race you, Ara said, and sprinted for the house. Zirad and Ara fell in behind her, all three of them laughing free. Done. Finally, I've been looking forward to the end of this book for a while. So, that'll be that. And where will we be going next? So we're on, we've already done the Thread of Peace comic series. So we're going to go right into another kind of it's only 80 pages, so it's not a novel. It's 80 pages, so it'll take a couple of sessions. Red Harvest is what we'll be reading next. So there you go. We'll start that next Monday. Shall we see if anybody is around? We got some God of War. We've got God of War, God of War, God of War. There's only one person on that I have any interest in going to raid. We'll see. Last time I tried to raid, it wouldn't let me. So we'll see what it does this time. So I will see you over at Mr. Blitzer's here in a minute if it lets me.
Don't like the lights, but it's camera time. Said take the picture, but you rolled your eyes. Now I'm mortified, and still terrorized. Push me behind to get my better side. I wanna back, that's all you want. Me, I'm back, trying to get me free. And I attacked you. That's just false.
No, there's still something wrong. It's not going to let me. So we'll just damn it. See you next time. I'm so scared, my house, how can I run this? Always be watched by a that's no consider my privacy, static, probably haven't heard of it. Need to live a different life, just like this cameras always.